Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Analysing Anfield. I'm Josh Williams and I'm joined by Mo Stewart. As always, a bit of a Christmas episode going on. Mo, 6 points from 6, mate, since we last recorded. How we feel?
Very good, very good. That doesn't happen very often. So yeah, I think there's been a lot of maybe angst and a lot of energy expended on how we got those 6 points. But the fact of the matter is, we are, as you say, 6 points richer and feeling a lot better about life going into Christmas.
Yeah, well, it's one of them periods where there's a game every 3 days, so there's plenty to talk about at the minute. Obviously, we played last night. We are recording on the Thursday at the minute, and I suppose the title race as well is taking a bit of a turn, hasn't it? I think people are starting to realise that Manchester City just don't look as imperious, maybe. I think that's fair to say so far. 30 points, I think they're on Liverpool already on 34, Arsenal on 36. So I think there's a conversation in that. But, yeah, I mean, I think we can touch on predominantly last night, while also throwing in the odd little talking points of Fulham, really, whenever it's relevant. But how did you feel going into Sheffield United? I personally, I've said this a few times this week, I felt it was going to be quite a sticky, not a particularly enjoyable watch. And I think if it was pretty close to that, to be honest, for me, it was close to what I expected.
No, I agree. I think I'd flag this game up as the toughest of the three for a lot of reasons before the management situation at Sheffield United came into it. And to be honest, I felt like the players approached it with that in mind as well. They played the game like they knew it was going to be tough. And there were times when they made it tough themselves, but it was very much a performance where they were absolutely willing to roll up their sleeves and dig in and get the job done. And in some ways, it kind of puts the previous performance into other perspective, because we don't talk about complacency a lot in this Liverpool team. But I feel like there's times when they take their eye off the ball. And when you see the way that they attacked that Sheffield United performance and the way they were so resilient, we're going to talk about Virgil, obviously, but he embodied that more than anyone. But when you see the way that they were so focused in that game, you can kind of start to understand, well, maybe they had taken their eye off the ball a little bit on Sunday against Fulham and thought, we just need to get through this because that's the test. But they passed both of them, however they did it.
Yeah, well, I think they passed both tests differently. Like if we do go back and touch on Fulham really quickly, I felt, and I've said this on the Anfield Wrap this week, I felt a lot of it was just due to the goalkeeper. If I'm honest, I think that's I'm notoriously harsh on keepers and centre backs usually, but and maybe I'm just comparing them to Alisson, which is basically unfair. But I think the first two that Fulham score out of the three on a normal day, when everyone's fit for Liverpool, I think they just get saved, and Liverpool probably won out 3-1 winners, really. But Kelleher conceded 2. You can put it down to rust. I don't think it's necessarily he's just a bad keeper, but he's not. I also don't think he's the level that Klopp suggests. I think a lot of that is to big him up in the transfer market, to be honest.
Well, to pick him up in the transfer market, yes. But while I do agree that the keeper was an issue against Fulham, I do have some sympathy, because I think the issue isn't only with him. It's with the reaction of the defenders to him. And so the indecision around some of the situations caused by the fact that these guys are used to Alisson, who is so imperious. And I always felt before Kelleher, when we knew Alisson was injured, but before Kelleher had started this run, I always said it's always dependent on the defenders to kind of bridge that gap in quality that we lose from Alisson to Kelleher, because we've still got fantastic high-quality defenders who should be able to make Kelleher's job easier. And I don't think we did that against Fulham, and I definitely think we did that against Sheffield United. So, yes, I think if you look individually at the goals, yes, it's always bad when the ball goes through keeper's legs. I think the second one in particular, although it was interesting what Alisson himself had to say about that. He put that partly down to the philosophy of the goalkeeping coaches and what we're trying to get them to do. Yeah. Maybe he's trying to protect his mate. Who knows? I think he probably is to a certain extent. But the fact remains that Kelleher can't imagine that magically become as good as Alisson in 3 weeks. But the defense in front of him can maintain their high level, that mean that Kelleher's level is good enough. And I think that was the difference we saw between Fulham and Sheffield United. If you think of those 3 Fulham goals, I think all 3 of them were scored from like within the 6-yard box, very, very close. So as a defensive coach, you are saying, why are we allowing them 3 shots that close to our goal? So yes, Kelleher is an Alisson. I think that's very obvious to everyone. But everybody plays a part in making sure he's able to be good enough.
Yeah, well, I think if you look at the goals that we conceded, obviously, I think the obvious caveat that I probably should have included in there is before you ever look at the goalkeeper, the obvious caveat is always, ideally, just don't allow the shot to happen in the first place. So I completely agree with that. But then at the same time, it is the Premier League. You're going to allow a certain amount. It's almost unavoidable to an extent. And Fulham created chances with about 1.2 expected goals. Obviously, Liverpool conceded 3, which isn't great. I think they had 5 shots on target. Obviously, 3 of them find the net. And I think it's been an interesting couple of days on that front, actually. I tweeted this the other day because Manchester City conceded 3 over the weekend. Ederson was largely a fault for them against Spurs. And during the week, midweek, Arsenal conceded 3 against Luton. And David Raya was really weak. So it's interesting that all 3 title challenges right now have basically weak goalkeepers in terms of shot stopping. But Liverpool is going to get tackled because Alisson will come back hopefully around Christmas time. But I think crucially, as we get towards the end of the season, that will play more of a part. I mean, Ederson, to be fair to him, has obviously proved he can win a title. But I think Arsenal in particular, David Raya really looked. I mean, all 3 goals conceded from set pieces, and one of them in particular, he just kind of gets knocked over, and it's it wasn't even given as a foul, and that is saying something in the Premier League, because if a goalkeeper gets touched, it's like the police arrive at the ground meet or something. So, yeah, he needs to. Arsenal have got a problem there, and it's a big problem going for the title.
And a problem of their own making, which I keep saying, because it's almost... I understand the sentiment behind wanting to have strong competition in every single position, including goalkeeper. But you can never, ever point to a situation where that's proven beneficial for the team. Never.
Do you know
never
what,
been beneficial.
It's tricky, because I actually agree with the premise of the move that he's done in terms of being that ruthless with a position that is so vital in terms of getting results. I think the problem is, rather than upgrading a Ramsdale to an Alisson, he's kind of gone from Ramsdale to Raya, and there's not a lot of evolution there. So you've gone through the trouble of all these narratives for the sake of a really marginal upgrade, really. It'd be different if he could have landed about Alisson. Then I'd have been in favour of it, but I think maybe he'll be looking at it and thinking, I thought Raya was better than this.
Well, Raya probably was better than this at Brentford when he didn't have.
To be fair, I thought Raya was better. I'm a fan of Raya, to be fair.
I think about it from Raya's perspective. It's not really helped him either in the situation, the way that he's kind of parachuted him in. And we think about Ramsdale and where he was within the squads. He was very much the leader of that team last season. So as much as quality-wise, you can say, yes, an upgrade was necessary. The other thing about it is, like I say, the effect on the rest of the squad and how it looks. Because what Arteta has done now is he's backed Raya as his man. He said, look, this is the guy who I think is going to lead us forward. So he's made a few mistakes here and there, and it hasn't really affected them. Now it's starting to be more in the game. Like you say, that Luton game, it was the game of a goalkeeper who didn't really know what he was doing. He didn't really feel confident in himself, even though, like we say, he has ability. So you get yourself into a situation now where if he is going to be as ruthless as we say he is, then he has to say Raya's not playing up to it and Ramsdale needs to come back in. But he's not going to do that, because in his mind, that undermines his original premise. So he's backed himself into a corner, basically. And it's difficult when we're trying to talk about Kelleher and the clear difference in quality between him and Alisson. you've got to remember everybody else. Like, are any of the mistakes he made at Fulham worse than the mistakes Raya made? No. Are they worse than the mistakes that Andre Onana's made in the last month? No. And you have to think about confidence within a young player. So as much as we can be critical in certain areas where he doesn't match up, we've got to keep it in context.
Yeah, I agree with you. If we touch on Fulham a little bit more, actually, one thing we obviously have to mention is the quality of the 4 goals, mate. Absolutely crazy. I mean, I was on the ground, and when the McAllister one went in particular, there's a certain sound that you hear in an English ground when a goal goes in, and this sound was different. This sound was like a sound of shock as opposed to a sound of celebration, because he really caught it. I think it's about 40 yards out or something like that. What a strike.
Yeah. And what a way to get your first goal, because he would have been thinking about that. Everyone else has scored. All the other new boys have got a goal, and he's still waiting for his. And shots from outside the box seem to be back on as a thing in Liverpool 2.0. And I'm here for it, because clearly we're quite good at it. We've got that many players who have the quality to be able to make it effective. And like you say, there's nothing better than seeing one of those hit the back of the net. And the confidence it gives everybody, I think, was really important for getting over the line eventually. It was almost like there's no way we're going to lose after doing all of that. But I loved the one day goal of the month, goal of the day competition, goal of the month competition, whatever you want to call it.
Well, it's interesting that you should say that actually about the long shots, because I actually had a look at it on the back of the game, and I'm not sure whether this is good or bad, to be honest. I mean, it's technically bad, really, from a day's perspective, but so far this season, Liverpool, there's only one side in the whole division who are averaging an average shot distance that is further away than Liverpool, and that's Sheffield United, who are going down. Liverpool's average shot is about 18 yards out. Sheffield United, 18.5 yards. And for a bit of perspective, the best in the league is Brentford on 14.8 yards. So Liverpool are joint 19th, basically, with Fulham, 18 yards out. Last season, I think it was about 16.5 yards, and Liverpool ranked about, I think, 5th in the league or something like that. So you're talking marginal stuff, to be fair. There's not a lot in it. And I did look at the biggest culprits, it's interesting. It's interesting because last season they basically weren't there, because one of them is Szoboszlai, one of them is McAllister, one of them is Harvey Elliott, funnily enough, and the other is Trent. And Trent obviously is accustomed to playing as a right back. Now he's playing further forward as a bit more of a midfielder. So I suppose this is kind of a product of getting midfielders in who actually want the spotlight, as opposed to the lads we had before.
And also, I think there's another thing in common with all those 4 lads you mentioned. They all scored from distance. By the way, the one Harvey at Wolves, I'm definitely giving it to him. I don't care what the goals panel say. That's his goal. They've all scored. So it's not even a case of these are fanciful shots where we haven't got any idea, so we might as well take a shot. These are players in position, confident that they can get the ball into the goal from that area and doing it. Like, I think we've got 5 goals from outside the area this season already. And I think last season, I believe we had 8 the whole season long. So it's a difficult one when you say, is it a good tactic? Is it a bad tactic? Because it really does depend upon individual situations. Because there have been times when we've been maybe slow, a bit turgid, a bit lacking focus in the game. And then you start to see players taking pot shots and you're thinking, well, that's not the best option. I think there are times when we're taking shots now when they genuinely are the best option. And that's been proved by the ball flying into the net.
Yeah, I must say, I think obviously Trent, in my opinion, scored 2, by the way. But he's had a really good week. He seems to be stepping up of late. He seems to be coming into form just as the kind of tricky period comes in, where it's, there's a game every 3 days and that. But I thought he was our best player against Fulham. I thought he was really good against Sheffield United as well in what was a sticky game. And I think whoever we played before that, I think he was good in that as well. So he's really developing into this kind of authority during the game, on the pitch for the team and things. And it's obviously good to see. But when it comes to this kind of midfield chat, there's a lot of context in there, I think, that always tends to be lacking when it comes to talking about him playing as a midfielder full time.
Yeah, I agree. I think, and it's really understandable in some ways that context is lacking because it is such an all-encompassing conversation, not just from in terms of his career path as a player, but in terms of what it means for the team. Because this is the thing, it affects so many other players, but so many other elements of the team. You think about your passing structure, you think about the way we attack. Everything is changed. Everybody around him is doing something different. It was really interesting listening to Joe Gomez talk about how he's approaching the right back role in comparison to when Trent's there and the things that he's been asked to do, because he is sometimes inverting, probably more than most of us realize or would like, but it's a situation about knowing when to do what. And the change from Trent from a right back to a midfielder was always going to have to be a slow evolution because of how much we're asking him to do. And I think there's a certain element of people just want to be there already, but we need to make sure all of the different elements are in place. And the other thing about it that often doesn't get spoken about is how beneficial it is to actually have 4 midfielders on the pitch and technically only start with 3. It's like you're getting an extra midfielder onto the pitch. That's kind of part of the point. And the whole
exactly.
Trent being just a midfielder takes that away. And I mean, in terms of the space that he gets, it takes something away from it. So I'm still not 100% convinced that the best version of this team isn't with Trent becoming a midfielder as opposed to starting as a midfield. But by the same token, I do think there are certain indicators along the way that make me think that we are going to get there eventually.
Yeah, I think for me, I think he could play as a midfielder perfectly fine. I think he's definitely good enough to do it. I don't think it would hinder his game. I don't think it would limit his ceiling. If anything, it could do the opposite, to be honest. So I'm definitely in favour of it in that sense. But then you throw in the context of the squad. Now, I think Klopp would do it if Kyle Walker played for Liverpool, like Southgate. I think Klopp would do it, and we'd see Trent in midfield if Kyle Walker was there for Liverpool. And I think the option to buy a version of a Kyle Walker was there in the summer. But rather than getting a right back, Liverpool went and bought 4 midfielders, kind of clogging the engine room, really. And that for me was quite telling. Because if Trent does move into midfield, you still need a right back on the pitch. And the right backs we have are Conor Bradley and Joe Gomez. I don't know about you, but I don't want to sound harsh, but I don't want Joe Gomez playing every single game for Liverpool like I want Trent playing every single game for Liverpool. So, and on top of that as well, even if Trent was to play in midfield and Gomez was to play as a right back, we still need that right back to start inverting because we need that kind of that presence of 4 bodies in the middle of the park. Liverpool, under the radar, right? Liverpool have always had that. Liverpool had that going back to the original team because the 4 that we established in the middle was the 3 midfielders and Firmino was a false 9. Yeah. And then when Firmino kind of comes out the team and Nunez comes in, Nunez runs away from the midfield. So before we knew it, we had 3 in there, started suffering from it. Now the 4th is getting added again, but just in a different way by Trent tucking inside. So Klopp has always shown an interest in 4 midfielders, four bodies in the middle of the pitch. So even if Trent was to start playing in midfield full time, we would still need our right back or the left back to tuck inside. And finding that profile is tricky, and Liverpool could have targeted that profile over the summer but didn't. So I think we've maybe missed the boat in terms of a permanent switch for Trent to do it. But I do think we'll see it situationally like we did against Fulham for about, for a couple of minutes.
Yes, no, I agree 100%. I think the shape and the implications of the shape are as important as getting Trent's qualities into a more effective area. And in terms of the recruitment, it's so fascinating because I would go back to our summer chats and we were talking about this then and talking about what it meant for the profile of right back we were looking for. And the idea of someone who could do all of the things, another Kyle Walker, for example. The reason Kyle Walker's still playing for Manchester City in England at his age is because there aren't very many Kyle Walkers around. And ironically enough, I think one of the guys who I thought could grow into that was Julian Timber, who signed for Arsenal and probably got injured.
Funnily enough, mate, I said Timber during the week for Redmen TV that he was my example. I think if Liverpool wanted to do that, he would have been a player who could have done it to a high level. But obviously he went to Arsenal.
Yeah, and because we've seen Liverpool in the past, if they don't think that there's a player of the quality to do everything they want, they would rather not. They'd rather maybe wait and see if they can find a solution from within until the perfect solution materializes. That doesn't always work, as we've seen, because sometimes those perfect players are suddenly playing for someone else. Like another name who I've always been interested in over the course of the last couple of seasons as a right back is Ivan Fresneda, who was playing for Valladolid and doing really well against some of the big boys in Spain. And he's decided for Sporting Lisbon in the summer. So it's like, well, it's going to be a little bit more difficult to sign him now if you're thinking about signing him now. And this is it.
It's always the Portuguese club, isn't it?
I know.
Always.
It's almost like they know something or they're more willing to take the risks than we are. But in terms of what we want from that guy, you're right. It does need to be someone who can still do the things we're asking Trent to do now, even if in terms of the creation element, Trent's going to be there. So they're not going to be asking them to ping 45-yard inverted swinging crossfield balls. But they are still going to need to be a presence in the midfield, as you say, and a defensive presence in the midfield. So it's a tricky one. And I think the way that, as I said earlier, it's going to be a slow evolution means that Liverpool can take their time and work out who they think is the best player. Another fellow I think is interesting is Gertrude at Feyenoord. His profile is he could play pretty much across the back line and he's played defensive midfield. He's quite strong. I'm not 100% sure about his passing ability, but again, like I just said, he might only need to play a 5-yard ball to Trent every now and then. So they'll be looking. That will probably be maybe number 1 or number 2 task in the inbox over the course of the summer. So we'll have to wait and see.
Yeah, I suppose another talking point that's kind of emerged over the past couple of days, as always, is Darwin Nunez. He come on yesterday against I'll take that reaction immediately as like the kind of thing that sums him up really. But yeah, he come on late against Sheffield United and was just an absolute nuisance. I felt I loved watching him. I think he's crazy in a good way now. But when you check Twitter, and I understand why, don't get me wrong, but you always see, in my opinion, too much of a focus sometimes on on the finishing part. There's so much more to football. I know it's important, and I do get to points with him where I say, no, come on, you've got to put that one in. Like I got to that point with him, I think against Fulham, when the ball gets played over to Salah. Salah heads it down perfectly into his path, and he misses the ball completely. You know, in my head with that one, I was thinking, you got to hit the target there, mate. And ideally against Sheffield United, the 1v1 that he gets, I think a really cultured finisher probably goes for a little dink over the keeper there, maybe. But Nunez hit the keeper, and it results in these kind of finishing narratives being the main focus, when I'm always keen to stress. I feel like a public duty that I've got now, to be honest, mate. I feel like I've got to stress. Listen, yes, the finishing's not great, but he is a menace. He is a nightmare for the opposition defences, believe me. And just by him being on the pitch, things happen around him because he's there. He's just like a wrecking ball, really.
The Tasmanian Devil.
Yeah.
Or you should have said the Uruguayan Devil. That kind of fits my... I feel sorry for him because I think the thing that Darwin Nunez wants more than anything is to have 2 games where no one's talking about him and Liverpool win. and it's fine. And he's just another member of the squad. Because I agree that there's always a discourse, and I think that it doesn't necessarily help him with the way that we see him on the pitch, the way that some of the chances that he misses, he's clearly in his own head. Some of them are just, like you say, with the finishing, it's just part of his natural game that needs to evolve. I think about the one that hit the bar against Fulham as opposed to the one that you were mentioning. But then there are times when it looks like he just needs to chill out a bit. Conversely, one thing I always say about Nunez is that when he's had a game where he's disappointed or he'd come off the pitch disappointed, as he undoubtedly would against Fulham, the next game you see it. You see him taking that drive into the next game. You see the reaction. And the way that he performed on Wednesday night, he did exactly what that game needed. He stretched them when they were looking to be more adventurous and try and get an equalising goal. He gave them that risk and reward that meant that they couldn't really go for it. They never really got up ahead of the steam because they were always worried about what was going to happen the other way. And when you look at the way that he created the second clinching goal, I mean, obviously he had to give the ball away first because that's just what he does. But then if he'd have got that tackle wrong, it's a second yellow card. Yeah, and it's a big chance for Sheffield United to pump the ball up the other end with one man less to try and get that equaliser. But no, he gets the tackle perfectly. Yes, his leg goes around the defender's legs, but he doesn't actually make contact with them. He kind of gets there, gets the ball out, and comes back again. It's unbelievable how he's able to do it. And then, once he's done that, he gets his head up, and he sees Szoboszlai in space, and he plays the perfect ball for him. And having the presence of mind to be able to win the ball back and distribute it to a man in space at a pressure moment is what we want from doing this more and more. Those are the kind of things that as he's grabbing him around the head and walking him off the field, Klopp's saying to him, yes, more of that. This is what we want. Forget all the other noise. You're doing this. You're good.
Yeah. I think one of the frustrations that I have with the finishing thing is if you actually think of a player taking a shot, and let's say his effort goes slightly wide of the post or whatever, the difference between you, if finishing is all that matters to you, then the difference between you being happy and sad with a player's performance is inches from one effort. And I think that's way too almost fickle in terms of your opinion. Like you've got that's opposite ends of the scale based on, you're talking inches sometimes. And like, say for example, so far this season, this is courtesy of Andrew Beasley, friend of the show. He's appeared on a few times actually, but he tweeted a few days ago, Nunez has now hit the woodwork from 6 up to big chances this season. Now, hitting the woodwork is as close as you can get to scoring a goal, right, without the ball actually going in the net. So imagine how marginal the difference is there between Nunez having 6 more goals. It's so marginal, and that's why I kind of just focus on him getting the shots, and I almost think like the finishing part just kind of happens sometimes. Like hitting the woodwork 6 times, mate. Like that's just unlucky. I mean, there's not a lot you can put on that, and sometimes they will go in, and when they all go in, the narrative flips completely, and people start suggesting the clinical Nunez has arrived and all this stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's a delicate one, I think, always.
It is, and the hitting the woodwork is the kind of most obvious example of it being a game of inches. And I think there was a stat that I saw from Squawka saying that he's the second fastest player to hit the woodwork 10 times in the Premier League era, and the fastest player is Luis Suarez. And if you think back to early on in Luis Suarez's career, there's been lots of talk about the comparisons between the two, but it is something that you keep going back to. And there was a period of time when Suarez was just a little bit away. And then I was going to say he calmed down. He didn't calm down. That's not Luis Suarez. But he just found his range, as it were, and suddenly they were flying in from everywhere. I'm not saying that that's going to happen for Darwin Nunez automatically. What I'm saying is that hitting the woodwork in and of itself is not an indication of someone who's never going to get it right. So you're right, being in the position, taking the shots is still the most important thing. And for Nunez, I do think calmness is going to help him if he can just feel a little bit more calm. Feel like, as you say, he's still able to have telling contributions in the games where it's not going in, then he'd be okay. I mean, dare I say it, Mo Salah missed some pretty good big chances in the last couple of games. And without it becoming a talking point, Mo Salah will say the reason for that is because I'm the top goal scorer so far in this team. And you know what? He'll be right. But by the same token, there should be a time when Nunez will be able to say the same. And I think that time is going to be in January. So if Nunez is fit, firing them in and in a purple patch of form in January, all of this will be forgotten.
Yeah, I'm just waiting for the point where these efforts he starts doing basically exactly the same thing, but they start just trickling in. You know, they might bounce off the post, they might just go through a keeper's legs. That's all it takes, and then the narrative flips completely, and everyone starts suggesting that he's the next Torres or something, and it's annoying. Go on.
It is annoying. I have to say, to be kind of fair to some of his detractors, I was hoping that we weren't still having the similar conversation by this point. I think that's a reasonable thing to say, considering where we were when he signed. I think most of us were hoping that he would have got there by now, and he hasn't yet. And that means he's going to probably need a bit more patience. I don't think this is going to turn into a long-term Naby Keita situation where the projected player in our minds is always going to be out of reach. I think there is a situation where he gets to that point, but we have to be a little bit more patient with him than maybe we'd have anticipated.
Yeah, I think everything else is actually pretty much there now. I'm actually surprised that he's added the kind of linking play elements before the finishing elements. To be honest, I thought the finishing element would come first, and then over time we'd start seeing him bully defenders and knocking down from aerial balls and things like that. But so far it's been the other way around. But in terms of his numbers, because we might as well attach his numbers to this, I did get asked during the week from Paul Hart. So if you're listening, mate, thanks for this. But he did ask me and just said what are Nunez's numbers like, basically, in terms of his XG compared to his goals scored, because that's what we would typically use on the show. I suppose we haven't really applied it to Nunez. So I went and checked. And since he signed for Liverpool, in the Premier League, Champions League and Europa League, he's scored about 8 goals less than expected. So he's underperforming, I think, by about 7.6 goals, which is, I mean, it's not great. There's no way of framing it like. That would suggest it's too small of a sample size to say it definitively, but that would suggest he's not the best finisher. In comparison, like a lot of players out there are mostly average finishers, so they end up scoring roughly what they're expected to score. Some players score a lot more than that. They're the best finishers, like a Lionel Messi shot, or like Son Heung-min, Harry Kane, really good finishers. I suppose one of the major underperformers who immediately comes to mind for me when someone asks me who's a bad finisher, Gabriel Jesus is a player who typically underperforms. Since he moved to the Premier League, since his first full season, he's scored about 13.5 goals less than expected. So if he had average finishing, he'd have scored about 14 goals more, which is quite heavy, to be fair, for a striker.
Yeah, it is. And I mean, I think as well, within that, you've got to think the value of each of those individual XG chances and as they accumulate. And I think of some of the goals he scored for Arsenal, some of the really ones that probably actually had quite a high XG, which actually makes it worse, which means that he's probably missed quite a few more low value chances than you'd initially suggest from those stats. So, it's a difficult one. And I think the other thing for Jesus, particularly when he was at City, is that he was able to kind of be enveloped into the overall behemoth. So they didn't really, those misses weren't damaging. Whereas now at Arsenal, they probably will be a little bit more so. And for Nunez, they may well be so, particularly in that period where Salah's not around.
Yeah, it's one of them talking points that will always be there because everyone naturally and rightly so to an extent associates, a deadly clinical edge with a proper striker with a number 9, and Nunez eventually will have to start like being a bit more efficient, I suppose, with his finishing for Liverpool. But as long as he gets the number of chances he's getting, I'm convinced it will be a matter of time before. You know that line where people talk about waiting for a bus, and then three come at once. It's going to be one of them, mate. I'm telling you. But if we round up with title chat, how are we feeling now? It's a weird feeling, isn't it? Watching City struggle, I suppose.
It is. It feels a little bit like the Scooby-Doo ghost when City is struggling in December, though. It's like the narrative wants you to be scared, but you know you really shouldn't be, excited, should I say? And I know you really shouldn't be. We've seen them struggle at this period in the season before. I cast my mind back to literally 12 months ago, but again, another shout out to Andrew Beasley. They haven't lost, or they haven't not won for 4 games since 2017. That's not normal. This is not normal. And I think in a strange way for Manchester City, the fact that they are 4 big games, Chelsea, Liverpool, Spurs, and now Aston Villa, the fact that they have won 4 big games and haven't won any of them, that's a big shock to them. Normally, when they lose here and there. They lose where they've taken the eye off the ball, your Crystal Palaces, your Wolveses. They normally, when they're being matched against a big team, they will normally be able to go toe-to-toe with them and they will assert their dominance. And for them to not be able to do that once out of this run of 4 is a shock. When you add into the fact they've still got to go to the Club World Cup, which even if they win it, and they probably will win it easily, it's still a disruption. It's still an extra game that you've got to fit in somewhere else in the season. So there is other elements still to come where that gap could widen. However, Kevin De Bruyne
that's
has
become
been
like
announced.
a bit of a signature take of yours. You know, the Mo Stewart. However,
Well, it's better than literally or fortress or whatever you want to call it.
No, I like it, mate. I like
it. But as I was saying, Kevin De Bruyne was named in the squad for the Club World Cup, which means that even if he's not necessarily back to fitness, he isn't far away. We all know that City are traditionally better in the second half of the season. And that run of 12 wins in a row that they've gone on over the last 3 or 4 seasons that's got them over the line, we all still believe that they technically do have that in them. But all of that said, I think for Liverpool and for Arsenal, you can't worry about all of that. All you've got to do is get yourself into as strong a position as possible so when the City do start coming back, you've got enough of a lead that they can't claw you all the way back. I think that's the way to win this title race.
Well, their performance against Aston Villa in particular was shocking, really. 2 shots, mate. 2 shots for the Pep Guardiola team is outrageous, and they didn't post a single one after the 11th minute.
No,
I mean when I tuned in, they were absolutely getting battered. Really, really mad one to watch, to be fair. And they do have a lot of injuries or absences, if you want. Rodri weren't playing. He's key to everything. You just touched on there that the Club World Cup is coming up, which is going to be a big kind of distraction, if you want, for them, even though I think it's a worthwhile competition. But I think it will distract them from Premier League exploits, though. So I think usually the worry that I've got with City around this period is this kind of run usually results in Guardiola locking himself in his bedroom for about 48 hours with a tactics board, ending up with hair like Einstein and coming out with the tactical solution, mate. And he always comes up with something that just changes the landscape completely. And then City go and win 48 games in a row. This time, I'm not sure it's a tactical problem. I think they still have legs in the initial system that they've established with Haaland and the kind of box midfield thing. And that I think this is more just, and it's going to sound very cliche, very Adar, but I do think there's elements of hunger, a bit of a lack of hunger in there. I do think they're lacking a bit of quality in comparison to previous years as well, considering they've lost Gundogan. De Bruyne hasn't really played this season. Rodri didn't play. They've had a few absences in that sense, and they've brought in Doku, who we've touched on this show, really dangerous, but still very raw, especially defensively. Matthias Nunez looks like he's not establishing himself yet. Same with Kovacic. Both of them started on the bench yesterday. With Akanji and Stones starting as a midfield two, by the looks of it. Two centre backs really. So the definitely, I'm more confident than I ever have been that they're not going to win it this season, but that is still not that confident. if you know what I mean.
Yeah, I do. I mean, I think about how long it took us to actually finally admit we were going to win the league when we were 25 points clear and winning 27 out of 28 games or whatever. Like, we still were kind of thinking, well, you know. So it's understandable to always, like I say, be fearful of what's to come. But yeah, it's a difficult situation for them to write, because you say on one hand that when they've got Stones and Rodri and De Bruyne, then they're a very different team. But the fact is that they've been without Rodri quite a few times this season, a couple of times through stupidity on his part, and they've suffered every single time. So that means that the pressure on him is going to be ramped up massively. And towards the end of the season, I wonder if this becomes a tactic in the Champions League, by the way, teams are going to be targeting Rodri, because one of the reasons that he was suspended was because he reacted to a bad tackle and he put his hands in someone's face. Like, if he does that again at the wrong time, and in the Premier League, it will be a longer suspension for a second red card, then that could really be pivotal, because they literally don't have a plan how to win games without him at the moment. And for all of Pep Guardiola's fantastic superstars, they've never been in a situation where you take one player out and the whole thing falls apart. And it kind of feels like that's where they are now without Rodri. So that's definitely something that's new, something that may well come into the final reckoning. But yes, they are still capable of being a very, very good football team. And whoever beats them, if someone does, are going to have to be as close to their best as they could possibly be.
Well, we have Arsenal at Anfield on the 23rd of December. So that will be a very interesting game.
Yeah.
Couple of days before that, 3 days before that, Liverpool have a Carabao Cup quarter-final against West Ham. I'm pretty sure Arsenal have a free week. So that's not great. That's not ideal. But we've seen Mikel Arteta try to prepare for Anfield, and I think there's elements of overthinking in there. There's elements of he's driving himself mad. I think a little bit like Pep used to be honest. So hopefully that week will almost be a problem for him, really, where he's just got so much time to stress over it.
Yeah.
But I don't know. It's going to be an interesting one. It's going to be an interesting season. I think it's still out of three teams, even though Villa are flying. But it's one to watch, and it's one we'll revisit next week as well.
Another thing about that little run of games that we've got, the only reason we're playing West Ham is because they beat Arsenal. So we could have been playing Arsenal twice in 2 games.
Yeah.
Added to the fact that we're playing in the FA Cup.
Yeah.
And this is the thing. If you think about what I was saying before about Man City and the potential for them, even if they don't necessarily drop points, the fact that they're in the Club World Cup means that they'll be a game week behind, so they'll probably still be behind. So that FA Cup third round match will probably come when Arsenal and Liverpool are maybe clear at the top of the league. We don't know by how much, but will be the 2 main front runners for the title. And then you drop an FA Cup game into it. I can't wait for that, to be honest. I think in a strange way, both managers would absolutely rather not have it. But as a fan, bring it on.
Yeah, lots to play for. It would be really interesting if by the end of the season, it's kind of Klopp versus Arteta rather than Klopp versus Pep. Because in that situation, Klopp would be painted and Liverpool would be painted as the team who've been there and done it.
Yeah.
And Arsenal would be painted as the kind of newcomers, which would be an interesting dynamic. But we'll keep an eye on this anyway. We'll come back to it next week. I think we'll do an earlier pod next week on maybe the Tuesday, because from Wednesday I am going away for a few days. But yeah, we'll see what happens. But Mo, thanks for joining us, mate.
A pleasure as always, my friend. We'll see you soon.
And yeah, thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next week.